GBNews.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Happy Wednesday to you. GB News on your television and on your radio. Feel free to mix and match. Coming up on tonight's show, the Right Honourable Sajid Javid MP, plus Leif Johansson, the chairman of AstraZeneca, and Michael Gray, direct from Ofcom, soon to be censors of the British internet. I'm just kidding. They're all still frosting us out, giving us the bum's rush. We can't get them to return our calls. Vicky Spitt, one of those widowed by the AstraZeneca vaccine. You know Vicky, she was here on Monday's show. Vicky knows all about getting the cold shoulder from the big shots. A year ago today, she said farewell to her beloved Xeon. And almost immediately after, as soon as she digested the news, she telephoned the Department of Health because she wanted to know why her healthy middle-aged man was dead. And they told her, you go to the website, fill in an online form, and it'll be expressed to their customer service centre in the South Sandwich Islands for urgent attention. Well, that was a year ago today, and she has heard not a word back from them about the vaccine that killed the love of her life. Not a word. The numbers in absolute terms are disturbing. What's underlying them is even more so. We'll try to pick a way through them with statistician Jamie Jenkins. But we're not going to let go of this issue because something very dark is going on, and the half-wit propaganda that passes for British media coverage is a big part of the problem. Oh, get another jab or two. Get your kiddies jabbed, and then you can visit your holiday home in Spain. That makes perfect sense. Kate Hoey's here to talk about the State of the Union, which is not good, and we'll look at Germany's grand closing down. Everything must go sail. Don't be all standoffish with me, like Sajid Javid is. Let me know what's got you riled up by email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or by tweet at gbnews. First, as always, the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Mark, thank you. Good evening from the GB Newsroom. An attempt by Labour to force the government to introduce an emergency budget to tackle the cost of living crisis has been defeated in the House of Commons. 312 MPs voted against the amendment to the Queen's speech, with just 229 in favour. They also rejected the Liberal Democrats' call for an emergency tax cut. Earlier today, Labour repeated its call for a windfall tax on energy companies to help ease the squeeze on household budgets as inflation hit a 40-year high. The Consumer Price Index rose to 9% in the year to April, up from 7% in March. During Prime Minister's questions, Boris Johnson promised to look at all measures available to help struggling families. But Sir Keir Starmer accused the government of inaction.
Whilst he dithers, British households are slapped with an extra £53 million on their energy bills every single day. Meanwhile, every single day, North Sea oil and gas giants rake in £32 million in unexpected profit.
We're already spending £22 billion. We're already helping people with the cost of living in any way that we can, Mr. Speaker. But the reason we can do that is because we took the tough decisions to get this country through COVID, to make sure that we came out of lockdown in the way that was necessary, and to have a strong economy.
Well, the Prime Minister says he was shocked to learn that a Conservative MP had been arrested, having been accused of rape and sexual assault offences. The politician, who can't be named for legal reasons, has been released on bail pending further investigations, and he's been asked by the Chief Whip to stay away from Parliament. The Labour Party is calling for the politician to have the whip removed. A man who stabbed his landlords to death because he was paranoid about COVID has been found guilty of double murder. The jury took just 45 minutes to convict 46-year-old Daniel Briceno Garcia. He'd attacked Sonia Calvi and Edgar Daza at their home in South London during the first national lockdown in April 2020. He denied murder, claiming he was mentally ill at the time. The Duke and Duchess of Cornwall have attended a ceremony to honour Canada's war dead in Ottawa. Prince Charles laid a wreath of poppies, while Camilla left a bouquet. It's the second day of their tour, which is part of the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, marking Queen Elizabeth's 7 decades on the throne. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Steyn.
Thank you, Tamsin. Let's go back and stick with the royal couple in Ottawa. I'll give you a small example of the stuff that comes across my transom every hour of the day. This is from Jacinda Trudeau in the selfsame Dominion of Canada, 4:05 p.m. The Prime Minister and His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales will participate in a discussion on sustainable finance in combating climate change and building a net zero economy. That's in about, exactly an hour's time from now. Eastern time in North America. Right now, millions upon millions of people don't have, quote, sustainable finances because inflation is the highest in 40 years, the supply chains are wrecked, the cost of the most basic stuff you need to keep body and soul together is going way up, blameless citizens are having to choose between heating and eating, the fall in UK living standards is the worst since 1956, government borrowing is the highest since records began, 1 in 9 people is on the NHS waiting list, and yet the Prince of Wales is holding a discussion on net zero. Let them eat carbon credits. Let us leave aside for the moment the constitutional abomination of all this. He's in residence at Rideau Hall, which is the seat of royal authority in Canada. And he's in Loco Reginae in place of the Queen. And he's touting, look at that. That's his personal customised royal standard in Canada as the Prince of Wales. And yet he's touting net zero as if it's a universally agreed good. It isn't. It's a contentious political position that millions upon millions of his future subjects do not accept. And he has no business taking one side of that when he's representing the Queen. But as I said, set aside the constitutional malodorousness. It's more basic than that. If the Queen's heir or the Queen's prime ministers gave a monkey's cuss about the people, they wouldn't be talking about net zero. They'd be talking about how to stop making things worse for you. But that nice Chancellor of the Exchequer, he's so sexy and rich. He took pity on us and he cut the fuel tax by 5p a litre. Just a few weeks ago. Yeah, well, whoop-de-doo. That was, in fact, less than 2 months ago, and petrol prices are now higher than where they were before his cut. So that did nothing. It's over. It's gone. It's dropping a pebble into the lake. It's over. The water's closed up around it and continued onward. But not to worry, the Prince of Wales is commanding an audience of his mother's Prime Minister so they can talk about net zero as if none of this economic devastation is even happening. Message from His Royal Highness. Nya, can't hear you. Are our rulers truly this feckless, this obtuse, this tone deaf? It's kind of hard to believe. After last night's show, an Australian viewer sent me a note that what's going on is a kind of controlled demolition of the Western world. You know, like when they take down an ugly high-rise building so that it falls in the way they want it to fall. Now, I like a conspiracy theory as much as the next chap, but the idea that our rulers are deliberately demolishing the free world is a bit of a stretch. Except that if they were doing this deliberately, rather than because they're merely stupid, what exactly would they be doing differently? As Laura Perrins pointed out on this show last week, all your current woes, all the things actually afflicting you and tormenting you right now, are what they want. And they quite openly state that it's what they want. You're driving less because you can't afford petrol at the current prices? Oh, that's great, less environmental devastation. You can't afford meat? Likewise great, less of that bovine flatulence that's killing the planet. The price of wheat is up 40%. Oh, no, not good enough. We're going to have to try expanding that Ukraine war to a few neighbouring countries. You didn't get your cancer diagnosed until it had metastasized into full-blown stage 4. Terrific. You're looking at a seriously lower carbon footprint. Congratulations. This is how they talk, quite openly. You're the problem. The COVID softened us up for lockdown. Lockdown softened us up for vaccine passports. Vaccine passports softened us up for Chinese social credit scores. As I mentioned, in just a few days, it's Davos, the World Economic Forum run by Klaus Schwab, the twin brother of Ming the Merciless. That's Ming, that's Ming on the left and Klaus on the right, I believe. And also in a few days, also in Switzerland, it's almost like that's where everything important is happening. It's the World Health Assembly meeting to sign us all up to the new global pandemic treaty promoted by Bill Gates. If you're having a hard time telling one sinister globalist from another, well, Klaus Schwab is Ming the Merciless. And Bill Gates is Moob the Merciless. Oh, don't worry, we'll still have domestic politics, the cake party versus the curry party, with maybe a ginger growler party coming up in between to split the two sides. But all the important stuff will be decided at the Spectre Board meeting in the hollowed-out Swiss Alp between Ming the Merciless, Moob the Merciless, and the other fellas who count when nobody else does. We'll still get to vote for leaders who can pass off the new post-democratic era as something nice and fluffy like, how about working together?
Is especially true when it comes to the climate crisis, which is why we will work together and continue to work together to address these issues, to tackle these challenges, and to work together as we...
And once in a while, you may even get a leader who's serious about, what was Kamala's phrase? Oh yeah, tackling the challenges, just like Scott Morrison in Tasmania. That's Scott Morrison, tackling the challenges. From 2 weeks to flatten the curve to 2 seconds to flatten your kid. That'll teach that lousy 8-year-old punk not to get his third booster. Let me know your thoughts. GBviews at gbnews.uk. You can tweet me too at GBnews. That impertinent jackanapes of a whippersnapper is not the only thing ScoMo's been trying to flatten. He's also been trying to crush Alexandra Marshall's Spectator story about why Australia, like the UK, is signing on to this new WHO pandemic treaty. Alexandra, it's strange his hostility, don't you find?
Well, what a bugger. He organised a radio interview just so that he could damage control my article, which was an interesting way for me to spend yesterday. But you know you've made it when the Prime Minister takes time out of his day to talk rubbish about your writing.
Yeah, and it was on 2GB, which is like the biggest station in the country, so he wasn't taking any chances. The funny thing, though, is was it the day before, whatever, he'd been asked about this treaty, and he'd been sort of gushing in saying that coming together under the auspices of the WHO is something we all need to do. So he doesn't seem quite clear on his own position on this thing.
No, well, look, my fabulous editor Rowan Dean belled the cat on Monday about the pandemic treaty that's coming out. And when Scott Morrison was asked to clarify his position, he was all for it. And he was really talking up how great it would be to have a one world health kind of thing going on. But unfortunately for Scott Morrison and for his counterpart in Labor, Anthony Albanese, this kind of WHO control over Australia's health is complete election poison. Nobody wants it. So what happened yesterday is the story went viral when all the major parties who are fighting for freedom decided to take this issue on and go all out against the Prime Minister. And instead of backing away, the Conservative Prime Minister deciding that this is a great opportunity to show that he cares about sovereignty and the people of Australia and changing what went wrong in COVID this time, he decided to deny that there was a problem with the WHO treaty, pretty much pretended it was totally fine, and then refused to say that he wasn't going to sign it. So I think Australia is stuck with this treaty, regardless of who wins the election this Saturday.
There seem to be two kinds of people in developed Western nations at the moment. There seem to be some who think these last couple of years have been a disaster, and whatever happens, we want to draw a line under them and not leave the regime of the last 2 years staggering on like a zombie you can't quite put out of business. And then there seem to be others who actually seem to have enjoyed being told what to do in every aspect of their lives by so-called experts, and think that, no, we just need to fine-tune that system by, say, picking a big bunch of experts who aren't even in our own country, who are somewhere like, say, Geneva, where all the clever people get together, and we won't even be able to vote them out. We can't go anywhere. Dr. Tedros at the WHO, there is no polling station on the planet where you can go and vote him out. There are significant numbers of people who actually seem to enjoy the last 2 years and want more of it.
Well, less and less of those people in Australia these days, and particularly even those who didn't mind wearing the masks and getting the vaccine, those people aren't so keen on the World Economic Forum or the WHO or the United Nations. They don't like international bureaucracies, and what they particularly don't like is the pandemic emergency powers that we saw Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews grant himself. They were some of the biggest protests Australia has ever seen, and the idea that the WHO could grant itself those powers and declare a pandemic whenever they feel like it, and then basically decide what our health future will be of allegedly a sovereign nation and free citizens, has not gone down well in this country. And it was so unpopular that the Prime Minister knew he had to go out that day and do something about the story, because the minor parties were cleaning up the vote. And they are terrified that they will lose power at this election over things like the WHO. And I presume it's the same in the UK, where the people aren't on board with this. They have not voted for unelected bureaucracies. They don't want it. And they certainly want control back over their health.
Are you surprised, Alexandra, by the way, in the official campaign, I'm not talking about some of the other parties, the minor parties, but simply on the Lib Lab side, that there hasn't actually been COVID. They seem to have agreed that COVID isn't an issue between them, between ScoMo and Albo, the Labour guy. They seem to have agreed that COVID isn't a thing in this campaign.
Actually, it's really easy to understand. They did exactly the same thing with climate change. So because the issues are unpopular and they've lost previous elections on these issues, they decided to run a unity ticket. And what that does is it nullifies the issue. If there's no difference between the parties, they figure, well, it won't affect us at the election. We can still do what we want. We can still give all the contracts to our mates and still bring in all these taxes. But if we have the same opinion, then the public still have to choose one of us to run the country. And so with COVID, Labor and Liberal premiers both did the same thing to all the people, and so there's no victory to be had. The Prime Minister oversaw it all, and the opposition leader agreed with him. So neither of them can win on this point, so they decided to just not talk about it and hope that it goes away. But unfortunately for them, and fortunately for the minor parties, that topic has not gone away at all.
Do you think that ScoMo's going to be fitted for a new job in a couple of days? He's going to be leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition? Some of the polls seem to think that.
That is a really tough call, because although people aren't fond of the WHO in Australia, they are fond of this climate change narrative that's been sold very well here through our education systems, and all those young teenagers who were indoctrinated into the climate cult, they're now voting age, and they're voting for not even the Greens, they're voting for these things we call the Teals, which are worse than the Greens. They're billionaire-backed Greens. And so they are voting extreme climate change, and those votes will go to Labor, and all the freedom votes will go to Liberals. So no one knows what's going to happen. We don't know who's going to be in charge of us after Saturday. We could be a small southern colony of China. We don't know yet.
Okay, well, we'll keep an eye on that and talk to you about that in a few days, Alexandra. Thank you. It's always great.
There'll be no more of me after that.
Okay, thank you very much, and we'll see. He tried to do to you what he did to that 7-year-old boy, but it didn't work, and good for you. She's indestructible, you great big inept, incompetent tackler, ScoMo. You can't do that to Alexandra. We'll get to your reaction next. GB Views at GBNews.UK also coming up. We have Boris in Belfast. What of that? Kate Hoey is standing by, Baroness Hoey, and we'll get to your comments just ahead of that. All coming up. Don't go anywhere.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Let's get to your emails. Michael says, "Hi Mark, you call it a controlled demolition, but its real name is the Great Reset. Well done for at least trying to expose what's happening." Yet the Prince of Wales is on board with that. That really is not something that... He's not the heir to the throne now, which in constitutional theory is an entirely private and individual position, supposedly, although one should attempt to comport oneself in a seemly manner. But he's now a de facto regent, and he shouldn't actually be on board with half this stuff, or he should keep it to himself anyway. Deirdre says, we're seeing unelected globalists dictating global policies to national governments on everything: green policies, health, finance and freedoms. Well, you know what I meant by that controlled explosion, or what my Australian commenter meant when she sent me the note. It's that there's nothing really holding up much of the world at the moment. The United States has to pay back $30 trillion. The US government has to pay back $30 trillion just to get back to having nothing in its pocket. Nobody in human history has ever done that, and there's no expectation that the United States government is going to do it. But we're all going along with it because we don't like to think of what would happen if the United States imploded. That's the point. If we just wait till we all go over the cliff, then all the big shots are going to go all over the cliff, and they're going to be lying at the bottom of the cliff with all the riffraff. Hence the controlled explosion part, so that at least they get to engineer themselves so they're well clear when it all comes down. Glynis says, I would rather listen to Kate Hoey any day than Sajid Jabbit. me too. And we'll be coming up with that in just a few minutes. You won't have to wait much longer. Remember that nice holiday home you had in Spain? The lizards. The lizards are crawling all over it now, every inch, every surface. And yet you cannot go to Spain to check it out without being fully vaccinated. And by fully vaccinated, they mean not only you, but your adolescent kids too. Getting a medical intervention you have no medical need of is why hundreds of thousands of people are dead or chronically injured and unable to work. Former ONS statistical honcho Jamie Jenkins joins me now. Jamie, you pointed out when you were with us a week or two back that we would have to jab 4 million children just to prevent one person heading to the ICU. We've kind of made a start on getting to that 4 million number in England and Wales. We're what, 10% of the way there?
Yeah, so it's 4 million kind of doses altogether, Mark. So that's, if you take 2 doses each, there's 2 million children. And in England, we've reached around 300. Yeah, so we've reached about 360,000, 380,000 in England. That's about 8.2%. I suppose when you look at the vaccine rollout among this 5 to 11 age group, it's much, much slower than any of the other age groups before them. But even the older children, kind of 12 to 15, they've reached over 50% of the vaccines now, of 50% of the population. So yeah, what the JCVI, so that's the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation in the UK, have said in their report and their kind of guidance on these vaccines is that you would need to vaccinate kind of 2 million children with 2 doses to stop 1 admission to ICU. You know, I've been quite vocal on this. I'm more pro-choice with a vaccine. I've said to you, Mark, I've had 2 vaccines myself, but when you start looking at the data, if people are genuinely having vaccines in children to go on holiday, that, you know, they really need to seek some medical advice before thinking of going to do that.
Well, isn't the whole problem with this, given that we've spent a fortnight or so now interviewing either widows or orphans of the vaccine, or people who have now got life-threatening injuries of the vaccine, all these in the brain and everything. None of these people needed to take the vaccine. There was a kind of moral pressure to take the vaccine because you'd be, if you were unvaccinated, you'd be killing Granny. Statistically, it's not incorrect to say that most of the people who are killing Granny, which I acknowledge isn't really a statistical concept, but that on the numbers, most of the people who are killing Granny now, that's to say infecting her, are the triple vaccinated. So there's a kind of been a moral blackmail that isn't actually justified by the science.
Well, no. So, Mark, if you actually look at the facts and figures, so the ONS here in the United Kingdom, what they do is they do an infection survey and they look at the likelihood of you testing positive for COVID. And the vast majority of people had their booster, so that 3rd dose, over 90 days ago now. And if you look at the facts and figures, you're just as likely to test positive with COVID if you've had a booster or 2 doses or 1 dose or unvaccinated, if you have had a kind of a vaccine dose within the last 90 days, there's a marginal decline in the chance of you testing positive compared to the other group. So overall, the vaccine, we know, doesn't stop you catching it. I think the point that you've been making on the show a few times now, Mark, is kind of what's been drummed into the population the last kind of 9 months or 12 months or so has been, everybody needs to get vaccinated. Remember, at Christmas time, Boris said, we can have this big booster drive. I want everybody down to the age of 18 vaccinated by Christmas. They even stopped routine health checks for elderly people to get young people vaccinated. Now, I've been looking at the new stats that the ONS published this week, Mark, and it's quite revealing. The vaccination obviously does help. People who do need that vaccination, if they've got a vulnerable immune system, it does help, but it's generally the very, very old that this helps the most. And if you start looking at the relative risk of dying, I was looking at the facts and figures that they published. It was on Monday this week, Mark, and actually, say you're triple vaccinated and you're over the age of 50, you're more likely to die than somebody who's kind of unvaccinated under the age of 50. So what the data is clearly showing is that age is far bigger impact on your likelihood of dying regardless of your vaccine status. And the government have been pushing, obviously, vaccines all the way down the age groups. We talked just now about 5 to 11-year-olds. They really need to look at the risk-reward ratio and really talk about which groups are at the highest risk rather than this just like a mass vaccine for all policy.
Yeah, but that's not what we've had. We've had a situation where people have been, whether you're talking about President Macron in France or Andrew Neil, who I think he's still on the summer hiatus from this show, is that right? Or Andrew Neil has been identifying the unvaccinated as the problem and has been saying you can't actually have a normal life in a Western society unless you get vaccinated. It's still going on. Spain, we've been talking about the people with holiday homes in Spain that they can't get to. There's actually no scientific basis for the government of Spain prohibiting unvaccinated British subjects from setting foot on Spanish soil, is there?
Well, no, Mark, and it's not just, remember, obviously, just let's take a step back to the back end of last winter. Every country around the world started bringing in this vaccine passport. There was a lot of kind of, if you haven't had a vaccine, you're going to say, you talked about killing granny. We're now at the stage this summer, Mark, where it's not even the unvaccinated who can't go. So if you've had your vaccine, so say you've taken 2 doses of the vaccine, which a lot of people did decide to stop at 2 doses of the vaccine, and that would have been more than 9 months ago, you're treated by Spain as unvaccinated. So if you want to go on holiday, you need to have a vaccine. Now, some countries like France will allow you to pay to have a test. But again, it's just a charade having all of these tests. So the scientific data is quite clear there now, Mark, but especially with Omicron, you're no more likely, if you've had a vaccine in the last 90 days, yes, you might be slightly less likely to test positive than the other groups. But the vast majority in the country now who've had a vaccine, be that 1, 2, 3 doses or no vaccines at all, are just as likely to test positive. And if they're stopping people traveling to these countries because they're worried about infecting others, then it's absolutely bonkers that they're treating people kind of and segregating them. And remember, Mark, some countries around the world are getting rid of all the restrictions the UK already has. You've got plenty of places in Europe. But I think in places like Canada, like you say, you think, but you obviously know a lot more of, they've got very, very tight restrictions, even within the country, let alone travelling abroad.
Yep, no, that's absolutely disgusting. You can't get on a train from Montreal to Toronto if you're unvaccinated. Perhaps the Prince of Wales, while he's holding useless meetings with Justin on net zero, perhaps he might, if he's going to be political, he could at least be political about something that matters. That was very interesting to hear that analysis, Jamie. As you know, I think there's a gulf between the propaganda and the statistics. And in that gulf, I am very interested in exploring what's really going on. But I don't think one can deny that between the propaganda and the statistics, there is a huge yawning gulf. Great to see you, Jamie. Look forward to the next time. Boris Johnson, speaking, if you can't go to Spain, you can always go to Northern Ireland because it's almost as foreign now. So Boris Johnson was in Belfast and it was reported as a big deal, almost as big a deal as when he was in Kiev. De jure, the Prime Minister visiting Belfast should be no more exciting than the Prime Minister visiting Bath, Birmingham or Billingsgate. But one weird side effect of the Northern Ireland Protocol is that the PM setting foot on British sovereign territory is now passed off as a kind of state visit to some distant land. This sort of thing catches on. I was reading The Spectator, and it had some useful facts in there. For example, there's been, quote, a 50% rise in Ireland's exports of goods to Northern Ireland versus 2018, filling a hole left by British exports. So because Scottish, Welsh and English manufacturers have been forced to withdraw from Ulster because of that super hard border in the Irish Sea, it's been a bonanza for those on the southern side of the soft border within Ireland itself. But look at the words Fraser Nelson chooses there, a hole left by British exports. Britain doesn't export to Northern Ireland, we're part of the same country. Yet even unionists such as Mr. Nelson have subliminally absorbed, at least linguistically, the logic of the protocol, that this corner of the union is now sufficiently foreign that we have to export things to it. Baroness Hoey is a doughtier defender of the union than many of our ministers, and it's great to have her back. Kate, the whole point of the Belfast Agreement, whatever one feels about it from whichever side, is that it was supposed to maintain the constitutional position and not let it drift in one direction or another. And in fact, since Brussels got mixed up with it in this last couple of years, it's drifted faster almost than at any, well, yes, I think almost than any time since the Irish Free State came into being a century ago. I mean, it's really been fast-tracked out of the UK.
Yes, Mark, you're absolutely right. It's been a drip approach to it, and of course the European Union, practically everything they said about the protocol was about preserving and protecting the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, when actually it is doing the exact opposite. The Belfast Good Friday Agreement now has been broken on the consent principle, on the whole question of the way that we are meant to be having cross-community consent. That doesn't happen anymore. But I think on the economic side, I mean, you're absolutely right. This is very, very much about ensuring that the Republic of Ireland, who of course are still a member of the European Union and have played a very, very important part in the EU policy making on what should happen to the protocol, they are doing very well, because if you can't get something in from Great Britain, your own country, you will have to go somewhere else. And so there has been a bigger trade. But of course, all the businesses that depend on their sending goods to Great Britain and getting goods back from Great Britain are suffering. And so economically, there is no such thing as it being the best of both worlds, which is what was pushed very strongly as being something that was important. But we have moved a bit, I have to say, this week. The visit of the Prime Minister, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is amazing, isn't it, how little time Prime Ministers of any parties actually come to Northern Ireland. And I remember way back when I was a minister, seeing a letter from Tony Blair as the Prime Minister that went to all his ministers. It was around about the time they were actually dealing with the Belfast Agreement. And he sent a very stern letter to all his ministers saying he was shocked to discover how few visits there'd been from any ministers. And I think it's about time that perhaps the Prime Minister does exactly the same, because if you want to at least give the impression to people in Northern Ireland that you care about it and that you feel it is an integral part, then, jolly well come here more often, and don't come just when there's a crisis. And of course, we've been warning for some time that there was a crisis coming if the protocol wasn't dealt with. So Liz Truss's speech, pretty good, changes a few things, but it's all words still. So we need the legislation. We need the legislation that will actually guarantee that the Act of Union has not been broken, restores Article 6, which is the really crucial part. And as David Trimble, who was one of the architects of the Belfast Agreement, Lord Trimble said himself, the union is the active union. And if you have broken that, then you're breaking the union.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I take what you say about Liz Truss, who certainly seems to be being tougher than the Prime Minister is. But even with Liz Truss, I'm slightly surprised that she thinks it perfectly normal that, for example, the common travel area, which has been a fact of life basically throughout the history of these islands, and formally so since I think it's 1923, that somehow she gives the impression that the common travel area is in the gift of Brussels. That's really, whether you're English, Scottish, Welsh, or an Irishman of either persuasion, that's incredibly insulting and I think short-sighted to do. Brussels has nothing to do with that, does it?
No, and the common travel area, which involves, of course, the Republic of Ireland as well, has been going for a very, very long time, and was one of the guarantees that came out as again that it would not be changed. I mean, I get quite annoyed sometimes that we see a huge amount of criticism of our government and of Britain from the Irish government and from Irish members of their Parliament. And I always feel like saying, well, in fact, I did say it the other day, if you really dislike the United Kingdom so much, shall we look at the common travel area? Shall we change it? Because they actually have much more benefits from that than actually other EU countries, and yet we've allowed that to happen. Yeah. But I think you're right about Liz Truss. There is, and it's not just Liz. It's a general attitude to Northern Ireland which has come from a very long time, a kind of almost ignorance about what goes on here. Always a willingness to support the Irish government and what they're saying instead of sticking up for British citizens in Northern Ireland. So I think the fact that devolution has stopped at the moment, there is no assembly, and the DUP and the TUV have made it very clear they're not going back into government until the protocol is dealt with. The legislation has to be tabled, the legislation has to be enacted, and then I think we might see some way of getting back a devolved assembly. But at the moment, there is absolutely no point in getting an assembly back when the protocol still is there, dividing up our country and making all those unionist members who dislike it and oppose it, every single one of them, have to implement it.
Yeah, no, that's correct. What's fascinating to me is there are now that the UK's gone, there's whatever it is, 27 countries, 28 left in the EU. An awful lot of countries going all the way to the Ukrainian border, but 20% of its border checks are now in the Irish Sea. In other words, they're not joking around here. They're actually putting the screws to us good and hard that they don't do on any other frontier of their empire.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, it has been used as a battering ram against the United Kingdom for leaving Brexit. We all know that, but also, they have made it much harder than was implied in the original protocol. They have shown no good faith, they have shown no flexibility, and they have just continued to not allow Maros Sefcovic, even if he wanted to renegotiate and change things. He has a very narrow mandate, and that mandate has not been able to change, which is why Liz Truss got, I think, incredibly frustrated, because all the talks were leading nowhere. So I hope that apart from the legislation coming through, Article 16, which was what should have been invoked about a year ago, will also be invoked at the same time. So the European Union needs to know the government is serious. And quite honestly, I don't think the Prime Minister this time, having really promised that there would never be an Irish Sea border, having promised all these things, this time he really cannot go back on some of the promises that he made when he was in Northern Ireland earlier this week.
No, that's true. And I hope he recognises the urgency. I think things got worse in letting it go on so long that Sinn Féin had such a cracking night in the elections a week ago. And I think, if he lets it go on until Sinn Féin have another good night in Dublin, down the line, then things are only going to get worse. There's an urgency about this that I worry sometimes he doesn't get. But thank you very much, as always, Kate Hoey. We're going to stay on this story because there's nothing bigger. This is the nation. The nation's being nibbled away by Europe. And we should do something about that. Thank you very much, Baroness Hoey. We appreciate it, as always. Coming up, you can ask me anything you'd like. We're going to go stumping GBViews at gbnews.uk. Plus, Paul Morland on tomorrow's people. Are you one of them? Or are you one of yesterday's people? You starting to look like you're one of yesterday's people. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. We're coming right back. Don't go anywhere.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
I once wrote a book that touched on the deathbed demography afflicting almost all developed nations. It was a long time ago, so long ago that Tony Blair was Prime Minister, and the late Christopher Hitchens asked the PM about my book and its demographic thesis that we were running out of babies, and if, when he got together with continental leaders, whether that was part of, quote, the European conversation. And Tone looked around nervously and then said, rather sotto voce, that it was part of the, quote, subterranean conversation, by which he meant that they all knew something was up, but that they hadn't figured out a way to bring it up in public without being denounced as racist. They still haven't, but it's happening. For example, Germany. Western baby crisis, first-time German mothers now over 30 years old on average. We're gradually climbing. It's the same story, Luxembourg, Italy, Spain, and yes, the UK, but we're gradually climbing up to the point where a woman has her first, in Germany, a woman has her first child about the age a woman would have had her first grandchild. Do you remember a couple of German chancellors back, before Angela Merkel, before Helmut Schmidt? There was an excitable chap called Herr Hitler who was always banging on about how the German people needed more Lebensraum, more living room. No people have ever needed less Lebensraum. The Germans are going out of business very fast. Paul Morland is the author of a must-read new book. It's called Tomorrow's People. The Future of Humanity in 10 numbers, and it's always good to see him. Paul, your main use for Germany in your book, you've got a graph of the total fertility rate of selected countries 1950 to 2100. And basically it just shows Germany's in the basement, but you're confident that Sri Lanka, Nigeria and Singapore's pretty much there already, but that Nigeria and Sri Lanka are going to join them. Is that actually any consolation to Germany if you're like one of the first to go out of business?
Well, I should express an interest, actually. I am a dual British and German citizen. So I've done my bit for German demography by becoming a German and having 3 children, all of whom also have German citizenship. So, as I say, I've done my little bit for Germany, although none of us actually lives there. It is a bit of a last man standing game. So for sure, Singapore is in the basement, but as I say in my book, it's pretty easy for Singapore to turn on the immigration tap and import people of a very similar ethnic nature to the majority in Singapore. So they can easily get immigration. And they're such a small country, it's not a big deal. Germany, if it turns on the immigration tap, has to turn it on from somewhere else. And we know there's very rapid ethnic change in Germany. I'm not so sure about Sri Lanka and Nigeria. Sri Lanka actually is a very interesting case because for all the other problems they've got in Sri Lanka, they got down to a fertility rate of a little over 2, and then they stuck there for decades. So that's proof that once you get down to replacement level, you don't necessarily need to go below it. As for Nigeria, I think replacement fertility is decades off if we ever get there, and there's absolutely baked in decades and decades of massive population growth. The question for humanity is, what are we going to do with booming populations in some parts of the globe and collapsing populations in other parts?
Well, you mentioned the inner, unlike, which I think is a fair point, Singapore can get roughly compatible Malays and all kinds of people to come to its country. Germany already, I think, is at a situation where something like 45% of its children under 6 are from what they call a migrant background. So Germany is undergoing a spectacular demographic transformation. And you have to wonder whether it's actually going to be, I mean, at heart, what is a country? Is a country just like, you know, Gate 58 at Heathrow Airport? It's just whoever happens to be standing around in it. Or is it something more than that?
Well, I think you touched on this when you quoted Tony Blair. What I've tried very hard to do is to lay out the facts, because I think before you can get into the values, let's at least get the facts out. Let's understand the speed with which demographic change and ethnic change in developed countries is happening. And then let's have the discussion about whether it's a wonderful thing that we should all embrace or it's something that might give rise to concern and which we want to address. But I don't think you can even start to have that conversation until you know the facts. And in terms of is it a good thing, is it a bad thing? It's very easy to get a finger pointed at you for saying the wrong sort of thing about Europe. So let's just think about countries in other parts of the world. If you went to Japan or Korea and said, do not worry that your fertility rate is barely above 1, or in the case of Korea, possibly slightly below 1, don't worry because they're having loads of kids in other parts of the world. All you need to do is turn on the tap of immigration and people will come in and maybe they'll learn Korean and maybe they'll integrate or maybe they won't, and they'll change your nation, they'll enrich your nation, they'll diversify your nation. I think that is a debate that the Koreans and Japanese would probably be prepared to have, and they would probably express some pretty robust views. Similarly, in Europe, I think people feel robust views, both in favour and against very rapid ethnic change. Yeah. But it seems like only one side of the argument is allowed to air its opinions.
Yeah, that's a very good point. The example I always like, because it's actually within the same country, is Turkey. People can't understand how Mustafa Kemal's Turkey seems to have gone away, and this new guy, Sultan Erdogan, has an entirely different view of what Turkey is. And in many ways, it's because the people who voted Kemalist in Western European Turkey basically had a European fertility rate, and in the Anatolian hinterlands they had an entirely different fertility rate, and eventually were able to wipe away Mustafa Kemal's secular Turkey.
And it goes beyond that, because in Turkey now the whole country has a very low fertility rate. The one part of the country that is actually holding up somewhat, although the data's not great, is Kurdish Turkey. And Turkey is becoming increasingly Kurdish. And that's not necessarily something that Turks welcome. It's certainly something that Turks feel free to discuss and express. But in terms of how people have the sort of size of families people have and their political views, there's very strong evidence. In fact, I was discussing it at lunchtime with my friend Eric Kaufman, who's really on top of the data here. And people on the right in the United States have much larger families than people on the left. So if political values are passed down from one generation to the next, I think we can see a decline of the sort of the Kemalist equivalent, the secular liberal equivalent in much of the West. And at least where you have large religious or traditional-minded populations, those are the ones, if they can keep their children within the fold, who are the future, who are tomorrow's people.
Yeah, unfortunately, all those right-wing kids spend 27 years in left-wing schools, from kindergarten to master's degrees or whatever it is. Thank you very much, Paul. That is a terrific book. It's called Tomorrow's People, and it'd be good if you were one of them. I'll do one quick stump. Let's see what it is. Do you think Boris's ambition to be world king is what's driving him to establish legacies, says Chris. He's not even going to be world king if he can't even retain his job as Emir of the United Kingdom without bits of the United Kingdom falling off to foreigners. I have two words for you. He's going to wallop your Wednesday like nobody's business. Dan Wootton is here.
Mark Steyn, good evening. You're going to enjoy the show tonight, I think, because Sue Cook is stepping into our lockdown inquiry. Once the biggest, or one of the biggest female presenters on the BBC. Mark, she has such distrust in what the corporation is doing, such distrust in what Ofcom is doing, that she's actually written to the Prime Minister saying we've got to properly discuss this World Health Organization treaty or accord. So, fascinating interview coming up tonight on our lockdown inquiry.
Good for Sue. She's one of the greatest ladies in British broadcasting, and if the BBC had any sense, she'd still be on there 3 nights a week or whatever. We're glad to see her. That is Dan. Coming up after the weather. Stick with GB News. Stay safe, stay free.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. The threat of intense thunderstorms across southern and southeastern parts of the UK during the next few hours. Showers generally across many northern and western parts of the country as well, as a weather front moves in from the Atlantic. That's going to bring some more general rain and gusty winds to Northern Ireland and western Scotland during the night time. But ahead of it, that's where we've got the intense thunderstorms, initially the south coast, extending then into southeast and eastern parts of England overnight. Frequent lightning and hail possible in places, the risk of some very heavy rain. Also the risk of wet and windy weather for western and northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, but much of the unsettled weather out of the way for the start of Thursday. Clear spells to begin, temperatures around 10 to 13 degrees. Further showers perhaps for the south and southeast first thing, and there'll be more showers for western Scotland, Northern Ireland during the day, perhaps some longer spells of rain in places. Quite breezy towards the far northwest. Otherwise, for the vast majority by the afternoon, sunny spells, light winds and feeling pleasant enough with temperatures in Cardiff 19, London 23, Glasgow 20. Then into Thursday night, we're going to see clear spells at first. Further showers, I think, for western Scotland and Northern Ireland at times. Keen breeze here. Then thickening cloud by the end of the night across the southern half of the country, and some outbreaks of rain or showers start to move up from the continent. 12 or 13 in the south, 9 to 11 for Scotland and Northern Ireland as we begin Friday. And Friday starts off rather cloudy, I think, for many, and there's the threat of some intense thunderstorms getting quite close to the southeast during Friday morning and early afternoon. Most likely at the moment they stay just far away from the southeast, but Friday's a generally unsettled day with rain or showers for many. More settled on Saturday with some sunshine.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.